Commander, let's light the sky. Training sharper drone pilots, learning how to fly. Mission ready mindset, safety leading every plan. Skills that build confidence from takeoff through the scan. Tune in at Sky Commander, come join the crew today. Learning smart, fly with purpose, level up your way. We see more, no sooner, that's the edge we're here to spread. See above, go beyond, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started. Imagine you're handing a construction manager this just beautiful high-resolution drone map of their new development site.
Oh, yeah, the classic scenario.
Right. And they pull it up on their screen, they zoom in, and it just looks flawless, like absolute perfection.
Right, like a video game.
Exactly. And they use it to calculate, how much dirt they need to excavate to level the foundation.
Yep.
But then, 2 weeks later, you get a frantic phone call. And they are over budget by, $150,000.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And why? Because your map, while it was visually stunning, was mathematically shifted just 5 inches vertically across the entire site.
And 5 inches is a lot of dirt.
It's so much dirt. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are exploring this massive, really terrifying canyon between simply flying a drone and legally, actually accurately mapping the Earth.
It's a canyon that honestly swallows a lot of well-intentioned businesses.
Yeah.
Because if you're listening to this and thinking, I have a drone, I can take photos, therefore I can make a map, you are literally standing on the edge of that canyon.
Right.
Because a mapping job can look absolutely flawless on a computer screen. It can look incredible and still fail completely if it doesn't answer the client's core question with mathematical certainty.
Yeah, the image itself is just a byproduct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The real product we are talking about today is trust.
Trust. I love that. So today we are unpacking a giant stack of intensive, high-level operator training manuals.
There's a lot of material here.
So much. We are talking United States Geological Survey standards, ArcGIS processing chains, PIX4D geometric principles, and the surprisingly complex, kind of clashing legal frameworks of both the U.S. and Canada.
It's a heavy reading list for sure.
Yeah. But our entire mission today is to figure out how to stop being just a quote-unquote pilot and start being an operator.
And that distinction, that is the foundation of everything we're about to discuss today.
Right.
Because a pilot is someone whose job finishes when the drone lands safely on the landing pad.
Hey, I didn't crash.
Exactly. My job is done. But an operator knows their job is only finished when the client can safely make a multi-million-dollar business decision based on that data.
Which is a totally different mindset.
Completely. Yeah. You have to move away from the aviation mindset and step into this data liability mindset.
Yeah, the thought that kept hitting me while I was reading through these sources is this analogy. Taking a drone photo is like buying groceries.
Oh, I like that.
Right. You go to the store, you put items in a cart, you bring them home. Anyone can do it.
Right.
But professional mapping is like running a Michelin star kitchen.
Yes.
It is entirely about the workflow, the preparation, the exact sequence of events, the temperature of the pans, and the final presentation.
Yeah, you can't just throw raw data into a pot, turn on the software, and call it a gourmet meal.
Exactly.
Because your sequence is flawed, the result is basically edible.
Yeah.
You can have the most expensive ingredients or, in our case, a $20,000 enterprise drone, but if your capture methodology is sloppy, the software will just confidently generate garbage.
Confidently generate garbage. That's a great phrase.
It really does.
Yeah.
So before we even look at a drone or draw a flight path on an iPad, we have to talk about how an operator's brain actually works compared to a beginner's.
Right.
We have to start at the absolute end of the process.
Yeah, the manual calls this thinking from the deliverable backward, which I found fascinating because beginners, obviously logically, think from the launch point forward.
Right, chronologically.
Yeah. If I buy a drone tomorrow, my brain immediately asks, where do I stand? How many batteries do I have? How fast can I fly this grid?
Which, to be fair, are valid logistical questions.
Sure.
But they're entirely focused on the self.
Oh, wow.
A professional thinks from the deliverable backward, focusing entirely on the client.
Right.
So their very first thoughts are, what specific file type is the client going to open first? What software are they even using to open it?
Yeah, do they even have the software?
Exactly. And what exact business decision are they making today? and what proves to them that this data is actually trustworthy.
Wow.
If you cannot answer those questions before you leave your office, I mean, you have no business putting an aircraft in the sky.
That is a harsh rule, but it makes so much sense. And the sources actually outline what they call the 3 failures of mapping, which perfectly illustrates this whole concept.
Let's hear them.
So a mapping job can fail in the flight like you hit a power line, boom, the mission is over.
Right. Catastrophic physical failure.
Exactly. Then it can fail in the processing, so the computer crashes or it spits out a mangled mess.
Oh, so bad.
Very bad. But the third failure, which the sources call the sneaky killer, is failing the business result.
Yeah, the sneaky killer. This one happens when you actually execute the first 2 steps flawlessly.
Which is why it's so frustrating.
Exactly. The drone completes every waypoint perfectly. The computer processes a beautifully stitched file. You feel great about it.
You're ready for your paycheck.
Right. But then you hand over the wrong file format to the wrong person. Let's say a site manager needs to know the cubic yardage of a gravel stockpile.
Okay.
And you hand them an incredible, photorealistic 3D model that requires specialized gaming hardware to render.
Right. And they're just on a standard laptop.
Exactly. And they don't have the software to measure it anyway. You failed.
You just gave them a beautiful paperweight.
A digital paperweight, yeah.
Yeah. The phrase from the training that really stood out to me was, we need a map as a trap.
Oh, it's a massive trap.
Because clients will call and say, hey, we need a map of our site.
Right.
But clients don't buy file types. They buy confidence.
Yes.
They buy the ability to sit in a boardroom, point at a screen, and say with absolute authority, move that dirt over there, or pay that contractor for this amount of work.
What's really vital to grasp here is that the operator's real job is translation.
Translation.
Yeah, because most clients are not photogrammetry specialists.
Right.
They are structural engineers, roofing estimators, or real estate developers.
They have their own jobs.
Exactly. They know what their friction point is, but they do not know what geospatial format serves that need best.
So they just say map.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the operator translates the real-world business problem into a geometric collection strategy, executes it, and then translates that geometric data back into a readable, actionable business document.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading this, I kept thinking about value.
Sure.
If I am an operator trying to impress a new client, my instinct is totally to over-deliver.
More is better, right?
Right. I'm thinking I'm going to process the 2D map, but I'm also going to throw in a 3D mesh, a massive point cloud, and a digital elevation model, all for free.
It's just a data dump.
Yeah, I want them to be blown away by how much data they're getting. So why is the manual so explicitly against this export everything strategy?
Well, throwing every possible file at a client actually reveals that the operator didn't do the translation work we just talked about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Handing a massive 40-gigabyte point cloud to an executive who just needed a 1-page PDF volume summary, that creates massive friction.
You're just giving them a headache.
You've essentially given them a homework assignment.
That's a great way to put it.
It confuses them. It clogs up their servers. It requires software they probably don't even own to look at it. And it ultimately dilutes the impact of the one piece of data they actually needed.
So value in the geospatial world is about relevance and clarity, not file count.
Exactly.
Okay, so if we are starting with the deliverable in mind, we really need to know what our options are in this whole alphabet soup of mapping terms.
Yes, the alphabet soup.
Because I guarantee if you ask 5 different people what a map is, you'll get 5 different answers.
Absolutely.
And the ArcGIS documentation makes it incredibly clear that different products answer completely different questions. So let's start with the baseline deliverable, the orthomosaic.
Right, the orthomosaic. It is a 2-dimensional, geometrically corrected, top-down map.
Okay.
And the critical phrase there is geometrically corrected.
Because it's not just a panorama.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
A lot of people think an orthomosaic is just like when you sweep your phone across a landscape and it stitches the photos together.
Right, a panorama.
Yeah, but panoramas have massive distortion.
Like when someone's face gets stretched out.
Exactly. In an orthomosaic, the software is rigorously correcting the camera perspective. It's removing the distortion of the lens, and it's neutralizing the scale differences caused by the terrain going up and down.
So it's perfectly flat.
It has uniform mathematical scale everywhere.
So if I measure a parking lot on the left side of the orthomosaic and a parking lot on the right side, the scale is identical.
Yes.
It's great for site context, looking at where the roads are, or measuring 2D distances.
Right.
Yeah, the manuals issue a huge warning here. An orthomosaic is top-down truth only.
Exactly. You cannot use it to look at vertical facades. If you need to inspect the complex brickwork on the side of a building or, the vertical struts of a bridge, an orthomosaic is totally useless.
Because it squashes it all.
It is literally flattening the world.
Yeah.
It's like looking at a blueprint.
Right.
So if you try to measure the height of a window from an orthomosaic, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the geometry of a file.
You're using the wrong tool. Okay, next up in the alphabet soup, and probably the most intimidating one, is the point cloud.
Oh, yeah.
Just millions of tiny colored dots floating in a black void on your screen.
A point cloud is immensely powerful because it represents raw three-dimensional geometry.
Okay.
Every single dot or point in that cloud has a precise X, Y, and Z coordinate in space, along with the color value pulled from the photograph.
So it's basically the skeleton.
Is the foundational architecture. This is what you want for complex volume calculations, for downstream engineering workflows, or for importing into CAD software so architects can design around existing structures.
But to your point about being intimidating.
It is deeply non-intuitive for casual clients.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to manipulate 3D space on a computer screen, a point cloud just looks like a fuzzy, confusing, ghostly mess.
Yeah, it looks like a glitch.
Yeah.
Then we have the twins that seem to confuse everyone, even seasoned operators. The DSM and the DTM.
Yes, these are constantly mixed up.
DSM stands for Digital Surface Model, and DTM is Digital Terrain Model. The readings had a great way of visualizing this, so let me try this out on you.
Go for it.
A DSM, a surface model, is like taking a giant heavy canvas sheet and draping it over the entire city block.
Okay.
Then you measure the elevation of the top of the sheet. So you get the tops of the trees, the roofs of the houses, the parked cars, the temporary dirt piles, and the bare ground only where it happens to be exposed.
Right.
It's the absolute top skin of the earth.
That visual captures the mechanism perfectly.
Oh, good.
Because if there is a dense forest canopy blocking the ground, the photogrammetry algorithm cannot magically see through the leaves.
Right. It doesn't have X-ray vision.
Exactly. So the DSM will model the bumpy tops of the trees as the surface elevation.
But a DTM, a digital terrain model, is what you would see if you could snap your fingers and vaporize all the buildings, all the trees, all the cars, and just look at the raw dirt underneath.
Bare earth.
Right.
And generating a true DTM is incredibly difficult.
Because you have to get rid of all that stuff.
Yeah, it requires the operator or advanced classification algorithms in the software to mathematically filter out all of that surface clutter.
You have to tell the computer, ignore the trees, interpolate the ground beneath them.
And this distinction is critical for civil engineering.
How so?
Well, if a client asks for an elevation model to plan water drainage for a new subdivision,
Oh, okay.
and you mistakenly give them a DSM that includes the tops of a dense forest, their hydrological calculations will be catastrophic.
Because water flows over dirt. It does not flow over the canopy of a pine tree.
Exactly. If you hand them a DSM, you are telling the computer the water is running 50 feet in the air.
Oh my gosh. That is a brilliant example of the sneaky killer failure.
Right.
You give them a perfect file, just the completely wrong one for their question.
Yep.
Okay, and finally, we have the 3D textured mesh.
The pretty one.
The pretty one. This is the one that looks like a literal video game level. It's a 3D object wrapped in a photographic skin.
But Pix4D specifically warns that a mesh is intended to look nice, not to be geometrically accurate.
Right. It is a communication tool, not a measurement tool.
And this brings up a really fascinating vulnerability in human psychology.
Oh.
We are deeply visual creatures. We are hardwired to trust things that look photorealistic.
Sure.
So when a real estate developer looks at a beautifully textured 3D mesh of their building, they subconsciously assume it is mathematically perfect because it looks so real to their eye.
But you're saying visual realism hides geometric weakness.
Exactly.
How exactly does it hide it?
Well, think of a mesh like a wireframe skeleton draped in a highly detailed wallpaper. The algorithm stretches and paints the high-resolution photographs over the geometric polygons.
Right.
That stretching process smooths over errors. It softens sharp corners. It hides places where the software couldn't quite figure out the depth of a balcony or the recess of a doorway.
Wow.
The texture tricks your eye into seeing depth that isn't actually mathematically present in the underlying wireframe.
Okay, so if I deliver a beautiful 3D mesh to the client, and it looks like a high-end video game,
Yeah.
the client might try to measure the exact width of a window frame on that model.
And because the texture is stretched over a weak wire frame, they might be off by several inches even though the window looks completely real.
Oh man, so it's an illusion.
Precisely. The mesh is a digital movie prop.
A movie prop.
Yeah, it is phenomenal for stakeholder meetings, for showing the city council what a site looks like, or for a general public walkthrough.
Right, that tells a story.
But if a structural engineer needs to make a load-bearing calculation or order custom steel beams, they need the raw point cloud. They cannot trust the movie prop.
That organically leads us to the illusion of accuracy versus resolution.
Yes.
Because we know what our deliverables are, but how do we actually know they are right? Because as we just established with the movie prop, a beautiful map isn't always an accurate map.
Right.
And this brings us to GSD, or ground sample distance.
GSD is a foundational concept.
Okay.
It is simply the amount of real-world ground that is represented by a single pixel in your digital image.
So if your GSD is 1 centimeter...
It means 1 pixel in your photo covers a 1 by 1 centimeter square of physical dirt.
Got it.
The pervasive myth in the drone mapping industry is that a smaller GSD, meaning a sharper, more detailed image, automatically guarantees a higher level of mathematical accuracy.
You see this all the time on forums, people bragging, I flew super low, I got a sub-centimeter GSD on this map, it's the most accurate map ever.
And it is a massive trap.
Really?
The United States Geological Survey, the agency that literally writes the spatial standards for the country, explicitly warns that tiny pixels do not save a weak workflow. Resolution is just how sharp the picture is. Accuracy is how true the geometry is.
Oh, that makes sense.
You can generate a map with a stunning 1 centimeter GSD where you can see individual pebbles on the ground.
Yeah.
But if the underlying math is wrong, that entire map might be mathematically warped, tilted like a ramp, or shifted 20 feet to the left of where it actually exists on planet Earth.
Because the pixels are sharp, but they're in the wrong place.
Exactly.
The manual states that accuracy is built in layers, 6 layers specifically.
Right.
Mission design, image quality, geolocation, control, the camera solve, and output validation.
And if any one of those layers breaks, your tiny pixels don't matter.
So, I mean, it's like building a house.
Exactly. The GSD is just the quality of the paint.
Right.
But if your mission design is flawed and you don't capture enough overlapping angles, which is the foundation, the software can't connect the structural beams.
Wow.
If your camera is vibrating and out of focus, the framing is rotten.
Yeah.
If your geolocation is wrong, you built the house on the wrong lot entirely.
That's a huge problem.
True accuracy requires all the structural layers to work together before you worry about how sharp the paint looks.
I also really appreciated the breakdown between relative accuracy and absolute accuracy in the reading.
That's a crucial distinction.
Because they sound similar, but they have massively different consequences for the client.
Right. Relative accuracy is internal consistency. It is the map's relationship to itself.
So, for example,
if I measure the length of a freshly poured concrete slab on your digital map, and it reads exactly 100 feet,
okay,
and in the real world, the slab is exactly 100 feet long, the map has high relative accuracy. The shape and internal scale are correct.
But absolute accuracy is whether that 100-foot concrete slab is actually pinned to the correct latitude, longitude, and elevation on the globe.
Yes.
You could have a map with perfect relative accuracy, the slab is perfectly scaled, but terrible absolute accuracy because the entire map is floating 10 meters north of the actual property line.
Exactly.
If an architect designs a building based on a map with bad absolute accuracy, they might accidentally design the building encroaching onto the neighbor's property.
Which is how you end up in a massive lawsuit.
Right. So how do we pin that relatively accurate model to the absolute globe?
We use ground control points, or GCPs.
GCPs.
And we verify that trust with checkpoints.
And the mnemonic from the training is simple but profound. Check. Do not cheat.
I love that one.
Let's break down the mechanics of this. GCPs are physical targets, usually big black and white checkered squares that you place on the ground before you fly.
Right.
You use high-end surveying equipment to measure their exact latitude, longitude, and elevation down to the millimeter.
And then you take those known surveyed coordinates and you feed them into your photogrammetry software during processing.
Okay.
The software identifies those checkerboards in the drone photos, looks at the coordinates you typed in, and uses them as anchors.
It physically stretches, twists, and forces the 3D model to align with reality.
Exactly. GCPs inject absolute truth into the model.
So what are checkpoints? Because they look exactly the same in the field.
Checkpoints are also physical targets on the ground that you survey with high precision.
Right.
The critical difference is that you do not feed their coordinates into the processing software.
No.
You hide them from the algorithm.
Like holding back the answer key on a test.
Precisely. The software builds the map, using only the GCPs as anchors.
Okay.
Once the map is fully rendered, you look at the final orthomosaic, you find your hidden checkpoint on the screen, and you ask the software, what are the coordinates of this pixel?
Right.
Then you compare the software's guess to your actual physical survey data.
Okay, so if the software says the target is at an elevation of 100 feet, and your survey rod says it's at 100.02 feet, your map is incredibly accurate.
Yes. But if the software says it's at 105 feet, your map failed, despite what the GCPs were doing.
Wow.
You use checkpoints to independently test whether the map actually earned its trust.
Wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here because the technology is moving so fast. If I look at the market today, drone companies are relentlessly advertising RTK drones, real-time kinematic.
Oh, yes. The RTK boom.
Right. The drone talks to a base station or a cellular network while it's in the sky, and it corrects the GPS signal in real time. It knows exactly where the camera is when it takes the photo, down to the centimeter.
That is what the marketing says.
So if I just drop $15,000 on an enterprise RTK drone, you're telling me I still have to walk around the dirt and spray paint targets on the ground?
Yes.
That sounds incredibly redundant. Doesn't the RTK solve the absolute accuracy problem?
That assumption is the most dangerous, expensive mistake a modern operator can make.
Really?
Yes. RTK is phenomenal technology. It drastically improves the geolocation layer of our accuracy chain.
The mnemonic the manuals use is RTK equals, right there, known.
Exactly. And its cousin, PPK, post-process kinematic, fixes the position later in the office. Both improve how well the drone knows where the camera is in the sky.
Right.
But RTK is a strong spine. It is not a full body.
It tells you where the camera was, but it doesn't guarantee what the camera saw.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanisms. RTK cannot fix a bad photo.
Oh.
If you fly too fast and introduce motion blur, your pixels are smeared.
Right.
The software can't match smeared pixels, so the 3D geometry becomes mushy. RTK doesn't fix that.
Oh, wow.
If you fly on a day with terrible lighting and deep black shadows, the software sees no features in those shadows. The geometry fails. RTK doesn't fix that.
Yeah.
If your lens is warped and poorly calibrated, the edges of your photos distort the world. RTK doesn't fix that.
So RTK only guarantees the coordinate of the sensor in the sky.
Exactly. Checkpoints are how you prove that the RTK actually did its job and that every other variable, lighting, blur, calibration, overlap supported it.
I see.
Confidence without independent verification is just optimism.
Confidence without independent verification is just optimism. That should be the motto of this entire industry.
It really should.
All right, let's pivot. We know our product, we know our accuracy standards, but can we legally put the drone in the sky to get the data?
The legal path comes before the flight path.
And the training manuals highlight that right now, the US and Canada have two very different philosophies when it comes to airspace regulation.
They do, and it is crucial to understand the architecture of both, especially if you are an operator working near the border or if you are trying to understand where the global regulatory trend is heading.
Let's start with the United States.
Sure. The airspace for commercial drones under 55 pounds is primarily governed by the FAA under 14 CFR Part 107.
The absolute baseline for Part 107 is VLOS, visual line of sight.
Right. You as the pilot have to be able to see the drone with your own naked eyes, unassisted by binoculars, at all times.
If you want to fly in controlled airspace, like a grid near an airport, you need authorization.
Usually acquired instantly through an app system called LEANC.
And as of late 2023, remote ID is an active requirement, which acts like a digital license plate broadcasting your drone's location and serial number to anyone nearby.
All of that is fairly straightforward.
But the massive friction point in the US right now is BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight.
Yes.
What if your client needs you to map a 10-mile power line or a massive 2,000-acre solar farm?
Under baseline Part 107, you can't just launch the drone and let it fly over the horizon while you sit in a truck.
You just can't do it.
Right. Routine DVLOS operations are currently locked in a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, an NPRM. It is not finalized law yet.
Because you have to wait.
To do it today, you have to apply for complex waivers or exemptions, which require proving immense safety mitigations.
Wow.
You cannot just fly BVLOS in the U.S. simply because you're in an empty rural corridor. Emptiness does not erase the visual line of sight rule.
If you are an American pilot listening to this, you might be immensely frustrated by that. Waiting for waivers takes months.
Absolutely.
But let's look at Canada, because they recently restructured their entire approach, and it's a totally different philosophy.
Yes, Canada moved to a category-based structure.
They differentiate between basic and advanced operations.
Right. Advanced pilots can fly in controlled airspace and closer to people, provided they use a drone that the manufacturer has explicitly declared safe for those environments.
But where Canada really diverges is in extending the range.
Yes, Canada explicitly defines EGLOS extended visual line of sight.
Okay, what is that?
If you are in uncontrolled airspace, you can use trained visual observers communicating via radio to extend your operational footprint up to 3.7 kilometers away from the pilot.
That's huge.
The pilot doesn't need to see the drone as long as the observer can. It has strict rules, but it is a clear published pathway without needing a special waiver.
But the part that really fascinated me was Canada's Level 1 complex category for lower risk BVLOS.
Yes, this is a game changer.
They do something the U.S. hasn't fully done yet. They separate the pilot's stick and rudder skill from the operating company's readiness.
Exactly. To fly complex BVLOS in Canada, having a pilot certificate is not enough.
Right.
Your company needs to earn an RPOC and RPAS operator certificate.
This is a brilliant structural shift.
It is. Canada is recognizing that flying a drone 3 miles away, out of sight, isn't really a test of how well you can move the joysticks.
Yeah, the drone is flying itself mostly anyway.
Exactly. It is a test of organizational safety culture.
Do you have standardized maintenance logs? Do you have an auditing process?
Do you have strict crew resource management protocols?
Yeah.
An RPOC proves that your organization operates like a true aviation department, not just a guy with a drone in the trunk of his car.
The analogy that came to mind is that it's like having the exact same drone, but flying it in 2 entirely different highway systems.
I like that.
In the U.S., you are essentially sitting in traffic waiting on a brand new highway to be constructed so you can drive BVLOS.
Yep.
In Canada, the BVLOS highway is open right now, but you need a special commercial driver's license, that organizational RPOC, to be allowed to merge onto it.
And the ultimate lesson from digesting both of these legal manuals is this. Your flight planning apps are geometric solvers. They are not legal advisors.
Oh, that's such a good point.
You can open an app on your iPad, draw a beautiful 20-kilometer mapping grid directly over a downtown city center.
And the app will happily calculate the battery life and tell you to press launch.
Right. The software does not know if you have a Canadian RPOC, or if you have a U.S. Part 107 waiver, or if you are blatantly violating controlled airspace.
The human pilot is the final legal guarantor, not the code.
Precisely.
Which perfectly brings us to the actual design of the mission.
Yes, the mission design.
The legal box is drawn. Now we have to draw the flight box. And this is where the sources say the vast majority of mapping missions fail before the propellers even spin.
Yes. Because beginners don't plan a geometry problem, they just plan a flight path.
Right.
They trace a box over the dirt they want to see, and they call it a day. A professional operator, however, thinks in terms of 3 distinct, expanding boundaries before they even pack their gear.
3 boundaries. Let's break them down.
Okay.
First, you have the area of interest. This is the obvious one. It's what the client actually wants mapped. The physical footprint of the construction site or the farm.
Right.
Second, you have the coverage buffer. This is an extra perimeter you draw outside the area of interest.
Yes.
And third, you have the operational space. This is where you are physically standing, where your landing pad is, and the broader airspace you are monitoring for manned helicopters.
The coverage buffer is the hidden secret that separates the amateurs from the pros.
Really? Why is it so secret?
You have to understand that the edges of a photogrammetry map are incredibly fragile.
Okay.
Think about how the algorithm works. In the dead center of your map, a specific rock on the ground is being photographed from the front, the back, the left, and the right by dozens of overlapping photos.
It is mathematically locked in place.
Exactly. But at the very edge of your flight grid, the ground is only seen by a few photos, and they are all looking in the exact same direction.
Because the drone doesn't fly past the edge to look backward.
Yes.
So if I'm mapping a rectangular fenced-in lot, and I stop the drone exactly at the fence line, The perimeter of the final map will warp, stretch, or completely fall apart into digital mush.
The math is weakest right where the client's property line is.
Oh, wow. That's terrible.
Exactly. A pro thinks one ring wider.
One ring wider.
If the client needs the fence line perfectly mapped, you draw your flight path 50 or 100 feet past the fence line.
Even if you don't need that data.
You capture data you don't even care about, purely to ensure that the fence line itself reconstructs perfectly in the center of the geometric strength. The buffer is structural support for the model. It's scaffolding.
And speaking of structural support, we have to talk about overlap, the amount each photo overlaps the next.
Right, overlap is key.
Pix4D, which is one of the premier processing engines, generally recommends 75% front overlap, meaning as the drone flies forward, each new photo covers 75% of what was in the previous photo,
Perfect.
and 60% side overlap between adjacent flight lines.
Overlap is the structural bridge of the map. Let's revisit the mechanism.
Okay.
The software needs to find unique, high-contrast pixels in multiple photos to tie them together.
Right.
If you only have 20% overlap, you might have a photo of a truck, and the next photo only catches the very bumper of that truck.
So the software cannot confidently figure out how those two photos relate in 3D space.
Exactly. It's basically guessing. High overlap ensures redundant mathematical ties.
Okay, but this introduces the great altitude trade-off.
The constant struggle.
Because if I fly higher, say 350 feet, I cover the site incredibly fast. I take fewer photos, which means my SD card doesn't fill up, and my computer processes it quickly.
Right.
But my pixels represent a larger area of ground, so my GSD increases and I lose detail.
Right.
If I fly lower, say 100 feet, I get incredible crisp detail, but I have to take thousands of photos to maintain that 75% overlap, which creates massive data sizes, longer flights, and more battery swaps.
It is the eternal balancing act of the operator.
So let me ask the extreme question. If I want the absolutely best, most defensible, mathematically pristine map possible, shouldn't I just brute force it?
What do you mean?
Shouldn't I fly super low, say 50 feet off the deck, and set my overlap to 90% front and 90% side? Just absolutely bombard the site with overlapping data. Wouldn't the software love that?
I see operators try this, and it is almost always a disaster.
Really?
I call it overplanning. Let's walk through what actually happens. If you fly at 50 feet with 90% overlap on a large 100-acre site, you will generate tens of thousands of unnecessary photos.
Okay.
First, you will absolutely crush your processing computer. It might take an entire week to process, or it might just run out of RAM and crash repeatedly. You've ruined your turnaround time.
Right, but what about the data itself? Isn't more data better?
No, because overplanning introduces severe environmental risk.
Oh.
A flight like that won't take 20 minutes. It might take 4 hours.
Yeah.
That means you're bringing the drone back, landing it, swapping the battery, and sending it back up, maybe 10 times.
Okay, but what's the risk there?
While you are doing that, the planet is rotating. The sun is moving across the sky.
The lighting changes.
Drastically. The shadows that were pointing west in hour 1 are pointing north by hour 4. The exposure changes.
Oh, man.
When the software tries to stitch photo 5000 to photo 5001, but one was taken in bright morning sun and the other in flat afternoon haze, the matching algorithm completely breaks down.
It thinks it's looking at two different sets.
Exactly. You sabotaged your own map by being greedy for data. Professional mapping is about rigorous efficiency. You match the flight geometry to the exact minimum needs of the deliverable, and you capture it as quickly as possible to freeze the environment.
And part of that environment involves obstacles.
Always.
The training manual lists 3 specific threats from obstacles, which really reframed how I look at a site.
Yeah, it's a good framework.
The first is obvious, the collision threat. You don't want to crash into a crane.
Clearly.
But the second is the geometry threat. Let's say you have a tall, multi-story building in the middle of your site. If you only shoot a top-down grid, the roof of the building hides everything immediately behind it from the camera's view.
It creates a massive blind spot, an occlusion.
To solve the geometry threat, you can't just fly higher, you have to change the angle of the camera.
Yes, you have to program oblique flight lines, tilting the camera down at 45 degrees, and flying around the building to look under the roofline and capture the vertical facades.
And the third threat is the logistics threat.
Right.
A giant steel water tank might not be something you crash into, but if you fly behind it, it will completely block your 2.4 gigahertz radio control signal or interfere with your RTK GPS link.
A mature operator stands at the edge of a site, and they don't just see a flat piece of dirt to trace a box over.
What do they see?
They see an invisible 3-dimensional puzzle of signal degradation cones, moving shadow lines, and geometric blind spots. They plan a flight that systematically hunts down and neutralizes each of those risks.
Which brings us to the execution phase. We are at the site. The drone is in the air.
The moment of truth.
The biggest mental hurdle to clear here is that you are no longer a photographer. This is data collection.
That's exactly.
The camera hanging off the bottom of that drone is not taking pictures for Instagram. It is feeding a hungry geometry engine.
And that engine requires pristine inputs. Let's talk about speed and motion blur.
Okay.
A photographer might look at an image where the grass is slightly softened from motion blur and think, oh, it's just a little soft, no big deal. The client will never notice.
Sure.
But to a photogrammetry algorithm, smeared pixels are catastrophic.
Because the software is looking for those high contrast key points. A sharp corner of a rock, the edge of a painted line on the concrete.
Right.
If the drone is moving so fast that the sharp corner of the rock is smeared horizontally across 5 pixels, the software can't confidently anchor that point in 3D space.
It says, I don't know exactly where this rock is. It could be anywhere within these 5 pixels, and your resulting geometry gets mushy and inaccurate.
Exactly. You have to fly slow enough that the mechanical shutter can freeze the ground perfectly.
Yes. And then there is the counterintuitive reality of lighting.
Oh, this blew my mind.
Every real estate photographer, every cinematic pilot loves golden hour. That beautiful, dramatic, low-angle sunlight at dawn or dusk that makes everything look cinematic.
But the mapping manual explicitly says dramatic golden hour lighting is the worst possible condition for a map.
It is the absolute enemy of photogrammetry.
Why?
Think about what golden hour creates. Long, deep, dark shadows. Shadows are black holes of data. If half of a gravel stockpile is illuminated and the other half is covered in a deep black shadow from a nearby building, the camera sensor records 0 detail in the black area. The software sees nothing.
So what does the software do?
It cannot reconstruct the surface, so it either leaves a gaping hole in your map or it makes up a weird melting artifact to bridge the gap. Furthermore, harsh directional sunlight creates intense glare on wet dirt or metal roofs, which wipes out features in pure white pixels.
So what's the ideal mapping weather?
High noon on a heavily overcast day.
Boring weather.
A flat, boring gray sky is an operator's best friend. The clouds act as a giant softbox, providing even diffuse illumination across the entire site. There are no shadows, there is no glare.
The camera can see down into every trench and perfectly expose the bright white concrete simultaneously.
Exactly.
If you're documenting a crime scene, you wouldn't sprint through the room snapping Polaroids while waving a harsh flashlight around randomly to make it look dramatic.
Right.
You'd turn on all the fluorescent lights. You want steady, even, clinical light so you don't miss a single detail. That's what the mapping drone needs.
Clinical is the perfect word. And you also need a clinical site condition.
Okay.
The software fundamentally assumes the world is static. It assumes the world does not move while it's being photographed, but construction sites are chaotic.
Right.
If you have moving haul trucks, excavators swinging their arms, or massive dust clouds rolling through the frame, you break that mathematical assumption. A yellow truck might be in the top left corner of photo A and 50 feet down the road in photo B.
So what does the software do when it tries to match them?
It gets incredibly confused. It tries to force the geometry to make sense, which usually results in ghosting artifacts.
Ghosting.
You'll see half a truck smeared into the road or a transparent excavator floating in the air. You have to time your flights for breaks in activity or fly high enough that moving objects are minimized.
I also want to touch on trigger logic because this was wild to me. When I first started looking into drones, I thought you just set the camera to take a photo every 2 seconds and you push the sticks forward.
That's what everyone thinks.
But interval timing isn't just taking photos. The manual calls it overlap in motion.
Yes. Let's walk through the physics of interval timing. If your camera clicks every 2 seconds, your overlap is entirely dependent on your speed over the ground.
Okay.
Let's say you are flying into a strong 15-mile-per-hour headwind. The drone is struggling, so it's flying very slowly over the dirt.
Right.
A photo every 2 seconds means your photos are bunched very close together. You might be getting 85% overlap. The software loves that.
But then the drone reaches the end of the grid, turns around, and flies back with that 15-mile-per-hour wind pushing it from behind.
Exactly. Now it has a massive tailwind. Its ground speed doubles.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, a photo every 2 seconds means the drone is traveling twice as far between each shutter click. Your physical distance between photos stretches out. Your overlap drops drastically.
So you thought you programmed a safe 75% overlap, but on the downwind leg, you were only capturing 30%.
And the software won't be able to stitch those images, and your map will split right down the middle.
Wow. So you can't just trust the 2-second timer.
No. You have to understand how the wind affects the physics of the camera trigger. You either need a flight app that triggers based on distance traveled, not time, or you need to manually slow the drone down on the downwind leg.
When you connect all this to the bigger picture, the sources point out that a truly great mapping pilot often looks incredibly boring to watch in the field.
It's true.
They aren't doing flips, they aren't zooming around, they're systematically checking wind speed, monitoring shutter exposure, and ensuring absolutely clinical consistency.
A professional mapping flight should be the most boring 20 minutes of your day. If it looks exciting, or if you're making rapid manual adjustments, something has gone terribly wrong.
All right, the boring flight is over. The drone has landed safely. We have our SD card full of clinical, perfect, overlapping photos.
Back to the office.
We go back to the office, we plug it into the computer. Let's look inside the black box of the processing chain.
Yes, let's open it up.
Because we keep throwing around the word stitching, and the manual is adamant that photogrammetry is not stitching.
Stitching is what Adobe Photoshop does when it bends the edges of 3 photos together to make a panorama for your vacation photos. It is purely a 2D pixel manipulation.
Right.
Photogrammetry is an entirely different mathematical beast. Let's walk through the actual engine. Step 1 is ingest and feature detection. The software pulls in all 500 photos and analyzes them individually. It is searching for key points.
And we mentioned this earlier, but it's crucial to reiterate. The algorithm does not know what a truck or a building or a tree is. It has no semantic understanding of the world.
None. It only sees mathematics.
It sees a sharp gradient between light and dark. It sees a unique cluster of pixels.
Think of it like looking up at the night sky. The software looks at an image and identifies thousands of unique constellations of pixels. That is feature detection.
Then we move to step 2, image matching.
Right. The software takes constellation it found in photo 1, and it rapidly searches photo 2, photo 3, and photo 4 to see if it can find that exact same constellation from a slightly different angle.
If it finds it in multiple photos, it mathematically ties them together.
It says, this cluster of pixels is the exact same physical spot on the ground.
Which leads to the absolute magic of step 3, camera calibration, technically known as block adjustment.
Yes. This is where 2D becomes 3D. It is based on the principle of parallax.
Hold on, explain parallax for me in this context.
Hold your finger up in front of your face.
Okay.
Close your left eye and look at your finger with your right eye.
Got it.
Now switch eyes. Your finger appears to jump back and forth against the background, right?
Oh, yeah.
That apparent shift is parallax. Because your eyes are in 2 different locations, they see the object from 2 slightly different angles.
And your brain calculates the difference in those angles to figure out how far away your finger is. Depth perception.
So the software is doing that, but with hundreds of camera positions instead of 2 eyes.
Oh, that's wild.
Exactly. The software looks at that unique constellation of pixels. It says, okay, this constellation is in the top left of photo 1, the dead center of photo 2, and the bottom right of photo 3.
By measuring how much that constellation shifted across the frame between those photos, it can reverse engineer the exact 3D location of that point on the ground.
And simultaneously, it reverse engineers exactly where the drone must have been in the sky and what exact angle the camera was pointing when it took each photo. It builds a rigid geometric network.
It figures out the drone's flight path better than the drone's own GPS did.
Yes, often down to the millimeter.
Amazing.
And once it has solved that camera network, we reach step 4, creating the sparse to dense point cloud.
Okay.
It uses those matched constellations to build a 3D skeleton of the site, the sparse cloud. Then it runs an intense densification algorithm looking at almost every single pixel in the images to flesh out the skeleton into a dense point cloud containing hundreds of millions of points.
But the manual explicitly warns here, you cannot densify truth out of weak capture.
No, you cannot.
If your photos were blurry or your overlap was bad on the downwind leg, the algorithm can't find the constellations. So when it tries to build the dense cloud, it just guesses, generating a massive, heavy cloud of noise and errors.
Absolutely. You just get heavy garbage.
Yeah.
And finally, if the dense cloud is good, we hit step 5, surface generation and orthorectification.
Right.
From that 3D point cloud, it generates the surface mesh, the DSM or DTM, and then it takes the original high-resolution photographs, drapes them over that accurate 3D terrain model, and mathematically flattens the perspective to create a perfect top-down map, the orthomosaic.
So if my final orthomosaic comes out looking like a Salvador Dali painting, the roads are wavy, the buildings look like they are melting into the street, and a bridge looks like a roller coaster, where did the chain break? Did the software glitch out and fail?
9 times out of 10, the software did not glitch.
It didn't.
No, the software did exactly what it was programmed to do, but it was fed terrible data. The break usually happened in the field.
Okay, think back to the mechanisms we discussed.
Right. If you have a moving shadow from a cloud passing over, the constellations change shape between photos.
The software gets confused and warps the geometry.
If you have motion blur, the constellations are smeared, so the software can't lock down the depth and the buildings melt.
If you fly over a completely featureless surface, like a perfectly smooth lake or a fresh field of white snow, there are no constellations to find.
The software just tries to solve a broken puzzle. As the manual bluntly states, post-processing is not a rescue machine for lazy capture.
That is a harsh but completely necessary truth.
It is.
Okay, so let's assume we captured it perfectly. We processed the data, the computer didn't crash. We have a pristine, highly accurate GeoTIFF or LAS file sitting on our desktop.
Perfect.
We are at the final hurdle, quality assurance and delivery. Are we done? Do we just drop the raw file into a Dropbox link, email it to the client, and head to the pub to celebrate?
Absolutely not. Handing over raw data without context is a dereliction of duty. Now is the moment we package the trust.
Package the trust.
We go through the 3 QA gates, quality assurance. Gate 1 is the field review. This happens before you even leave the dirt.
Before you drive away.
Yes. Before you drive home, you pull the SD card from the drone, put it in a laptop, and manually review the images. Are they perfectly sharp? Is the exposure correct? Did you actually fly the coverage buffer? Or did you miss a corner of the property?
Because realizing you forgot to turn the camera on or that the lens was smudged after you just drove 3 hours back to the office is an incredibly expensive, humiliating feeling.
It is the worst feeling in this industry.
I bet.
Gate 2 is the reconstruction review. This happens after the software finishes.
Okay.
You don't just look at the picture. You look at the mathematical report. Did the block adjust properly? Did the software report any high error margins? And crucially, did your hidden checkpoints perfectly align with the model?
You verify the absolute accuracy.
And Gate 3 is the delivery review. You look at the final export and file and ask, is this what the client actually needs to make their specific business decision today?
And this brings up the concept of the 2 layers of delivery, layer A and layer B.
Yes. Layer A consists of the raw technical files, the massive GeoTIFF orthomosaic, the heavy LAS point cloud.
But a professional never just throws layer A over the fence.
Never. You must wrap it in layer B, the client-facing package.
Right.
This is a PDF executive summary, annotated screenshots highlighting key areas of the site, and perhaps the most underrated tool in the entire industry, a README file.
The README file, it sounds so 1990s, but the training emphasizes it as a critical communication tool.
It really is. It's a simple plain text document that sits in the folder. It explains exactly what the files are, what coordinate system they are projected in, which prevents that $150,000 vertical shift mistake we talked about at the beginning.
And it literally tells the client how to use the data. If you want to view the site from above, open this file. If you want to measure volume in your CAD software, import this file.
It saves the client from feeling frustrated and confused.
And inside that README file, or prominently in the PDF summary, you must include limitation language.
Yes. You state your mathematical confidence clearly, backed up by your checkpoint report, but you also explicitly state the boundaries of that confidence.
Give me an example of what that sounds like.
You write something like, this digital terrain model is highly accurate on bare earth surfaces. However, it should be interpreted with extreme caution in the densely vegetated areas on the north side of the property, because ground visibility was heavily occluded by the tree canopy, and the data in that specific area is interpolated.
Some operators might think that makes them look weak or like they did a bad job, but telling a client what your map can't do is actually the ultimate flex of a true professional, isn't it?
Without a doubt, amateurs overpromise. An amateur hands over a map and says, this is perfect, it's accurate to the millimeter everywhere, trust me.
A professional provides exact mathematically proven boundaries of usefulness.
When a civil engineer reads your report and sees that you know exactly where the map is strong and exactly where the algorithms struggle due to real-world physics, their trust in the strong parts skyrockets.
The final map is really just visible proof of the discipline, rigorous workflow behind it.
Exactly.
The manual provides a final mnemonic to tie this entire massive workflow together. PFPD. Plan the truth. Fly the evidence. Process the proof. Deliver the decision.
Is the perfect summary.
Plan the truth by understanding the legal bounds of Part 107 or Canadian EVALOS and the geometric constraints of your coverage buffer.
Fly the evidence by gathering sharp, consistent, perfectly overlapping data in flat lighting.
Process the proof by relying on the parallax engine, anchoring with GCPs, and testing against checkpoints.
Deliver the decision by packaging the data with a clear README file and honest limitation language so the client can actually act on it safely.
That is incredibly powerful. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We've seen that professional mapping isn't about the thrill of flying a drone. It's about building an unbreakable chain of data. It requires a complete mental shift thinking entirely from the client's final deliverable backward. It means understanding the deep structural differences between a surface model draped like a sheet and a bare earth terrain model, and knowing that a tiny pixel resolution does not guarantee real-world absolute accuracy.
It requires navigating complex legal realities before you ever touch a joystick. It demands that you treat the drone not as an aircraft, but as a flying tripod, and the camera as a clinical geometric sensor.
You manage overlap, avoid golden hour lighting, and calculate wind speed to feed the processing engine exactly what it needs to solve the constellation puzzle.
Exactly.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. We've talked extensively about how visual realism-like, a beautifully textured 3D mesh can hide geometric weakness. Today, artificial intelligence and advanced photogrammetry software are getting more and more magical at filling in the blanks. When you fly a bad mission with deep shadows or poor overlap, AI can now synthesize textures, smooth out rough edges, and essentially hallucinate a perfect-looking bridge or building to hide your bad field data.
It's incredible, but also a bit scary.
So the question is this. As the software gets exponentially better at faking visual perfection, what is your actual value? Will the true value of a human operator lie in their ability to pilot the drone? Or will the ultimate, highly paid value of the human simply be acting as the final guarantor of truth, the one who can look at a flawless AI-generated model and have the rigorous discipline to say, I know this measurement is mathematically real and not just a beautiful AI hallucination because I built the physical workflow and the checkpoints to prove it?
That is the exact existential challenge facing the next generation of geospatial operators. I encourage you to take this deliverable backward mindset into your very next project. Focus on building the unbreakable chain of evidence, not just capturing a pretty image.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.